Okay, so Michael and Sean, I'm really, really pleased to be with you and to have you part of our podcast today. This has been a little time coming and getting everybody together. I'm very excited to be talking about in some detail your new book and just kind of uh, hold it up to the camera for a moment so people can see it. And this is Boys, a Rescue Plan, Moving Beyond the Politics of Masculinity to Healthy Male Development. So it's a mouthful. The book is packed and really valuable, really helpful. I've, as you know, have read it and want to let other people know about it. So before we get into the book in detail, I'd like it if each of you would just introduce yourselves to the audience. Many people know you, know my work, know the men's work, know Michael's work in particular, and Sean's perhaps, but Michael, why don't you start and kind of just give a little intro to you so people who may not know you can know who you are and where you're connected. And then Sean, if you could do the same. So Michael, please.
Well, yes, thank you, and thanks for having us on, and for your wonderful quote for the book. I think probably my history with all of this, in a way, intersects with probably when I first met you. I'm thinking it was way back, late '80s, early '90s in the men's work, right? I'm thinking that's when we met, and and then for me, I sort of I moved in the child development direction. So I'm the last 30 years or so very much in child development with the and then one of my foci is on boys development. And so then we created the Gurian Institute, which is a just a small business, right? An LLC. And what we do is go train schools and train people in male and female brain. And so I got, that for about 35 years, I've been really focused on trying to help people understand male and female and how male development works, how female development works. And of course they're equal, but that they work somewhat differently. And then took that into the child development sphere with Wonder of Boys and Minds of Boys Saving Our Sons, and now culminating with working with Sean on Boys a Rescue Plan. And now I pass the baton to Sean.
Super.
Thanks, Mike, for the introduction, and thank you so much, Jed, for having us on. I know how vested you've been in these issues for decades, you and Michael, and so I'm just happy to be, in your shadow. And Michael and I kind of really came together because I think we share a common bond around sex difference and how it's really important in our educational system, in coping mechanisms, and all sorts of really important things. And so my background is I was a teacher. I taught English. I'm a coach. I've been involved in community programs to bring sports to kids, hundreds of kids over the years, thousands of kids. And so that's how I got involved in this space, prior to meeting with Michael. And I started to see the differences of how boys were struggling and what we needed to do for them. So, and girls as well. So my programs have helped boys, have helped girls, and my teaching has done so as well. And so my background really is teaching and coaching and fathering and those sorts of things, and being involved in community activities that really help move the ball forward.
Super. And just before we go on, Sean, why don't you say the organization that you founded and work with, and we'll talk more about that, but just add that into your intro.
Sure. So I'm the president of the Global Initiative for Boys and Men. And so we founded this in 2019 as a way to educate policymakers, parents, school districts, and policymakers at local levels and state levels and federal levels. And our state reports have gained a lot of traction in places like Washington State. They're making their way at the federal level with various agencies and various representatives. And so really what we do is we educate and advocate for issues impacting boys and men.
Super. Well, as you both know, my personal life and professional life interact with these issues directly, and I think you both know, my my entree into the work started with the birth of my first son, Jamal, November 21st, 1969. And when I held him in my arms, I made a promise that I would be a different kind of father than my father was able to be for me. And our daughter Angela, who we adopted, was born March 22nd, 1972. And when she came into the world, it really was the launch of Men Alive, because as I started getting to know my children, and they've been a continuing source of joy. I now have, 6 grown children, 17 grandchildren, 3 great grandchildren, and a fourth on the way. But when I started interacting with children, and boy children and girl children, I began to see there were some differences right away. And I think every parent who has children intuitively gets that boy children are different than girl children, but there's a lot of confusion in the world about, those issues that you two, and particularly Michael over the years, has addressed very directly. So maybe we could just add now to the next level of our discussion by talking about your children, because I know you both have children, and talk a little bit about what you've experienced, beyond, we'll get into the research in your book in a minute, but your own kind of intuitive experience about boy children and girl children from your own lives. So Michael, maybe you start again with your children, since you've got a little older children, then we'll tune in to Sean and your kids and what you've learned.
Yeah. So Gail, my wife Gail, and I got married in the 80s, and then we in 90 and 93 we had Gabrielle and Davida, so 2 daughters, and now 2 grandchildren. Now I have 1 granddaughter and 1 grandson. They're still infants. They were just born end of
Uh-huh.
last year. Um, and thank you. And the it was really clear. I mean, having daughters. Not all joking aside, I will joke because it's true. So I have daughters. So right, I'm born, back in the 50s. It's me and my brother basically, 2 guys, and then I have these 2 daughters, and it was like, wow, that is different. Like, the play is different, right? The things they're interested in are different. The verbals at very young ages. I mean, there's so many things that are different,
Yeah.
and so that kind of fits with what you're saying. And for me, it was really experiential, and I loved having these daughters, and simultaneously then was doing all this research, right, on male female brain difference, and just living it out and laughing about it.
Indeed. Well, that's great. So, Sean, a little bit about your children and anything you've learned about some of the differences between boys and girls from your life.
Sure. I married in '97, and my wife and I our first child was in 2003, and then another one in 2005. And we just, or I'm sorry, one in 2005 and one in 2008. I got the years there wrong. 2005 and 2008. So we waited a little while, and boys are different. And I've had the opportunity to be around a lot of children, not just only as a teacher, but as a coach and in programs. And I noticed right away that my kids were definitely adventurous and a little bit of risk takers. They loved the rough and tumble play and those sorts of things. Now, my wife, you have to realize, is one of 8, 6 girls, 2 boys. Her house is like Little Women, and my house is like Rocky, right? So it was 3 boys and a girl, and with my father, it really was a boys' house, and so it was much more rough and tumble, and whereas I think hers was a little more genteel. And that's kind of the way I explain it. And so us sort of raising boys has been really exciting. I think she's gotten really good at, when they were young, having that rough and tumble play with them, and the tickle stuff and the wrestling and that kind of a thing. And I think it's built an intimacy with my wife. She has a great relationship with the boys. They're able to have intimate conversations with her. And I think that's wonderful. And she recognizes all their boyness. And at the same time, as one of, 6 girls, she has that deep connection too, with being able to connect with girls. She's really good with my nieces and things like that. She's very thoughtful. Nieces just love to talk to her. And I've been able to connect with my nieces. So I think, growing up and having these large families, we've been able to connect with boys and with girls and understand and see those differences.
Super. Well, so beyond our personal lives, I know my first book came out in 1983, Inside Out, Becoming My Own Man, and started at least my literary writing. And at the time, there were very few books written specifically around men's issues and men's health. And now there are quite a number, and a lot of good books. And Michael has written many, as we know, and we've collaborated over the years and getting the word out about our latest books that have come out. I've only written 17. Michael is, the godfather of men's and male books. But the idea of a collaboration, there's very few books that I know, and even fewer good books. And I don't even know that I could name one or two that are a collaboration between two different writers, and in your case, two different men. And I'd be very interested. The book is out now. You've got a little bit of track record of how it's been received, and I'd be quite interested in having you share. And again, we'll start with Michael to talk a little bit about how did you decide at this point? I know you've done a few collaborations with other writers, but this particular one with Sean, and how that then produced the book that we will get into now and talk more about.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, I do have a writing disorder, which you referred to, which is that I just can't stop writing. And so I have written a lot, right? I published dozens of books over a long career. I think 12 of them or 10 of them or something have been co-authored. And I always find the co-authoring experience really interesting because, and by the way, all have been co-authored with women in the past until with Sean. I had one a friend of mine who's a young adult author who helped me with one. But in terms of sort of the big co-authoring, it's always been with women, and it's been really great. I mean, I think I just I get other perspectives from other people, and they have other expertise. So with this book, what happened was over the years, I've been reading Sean's Substack and reading Sean's writing, and it's really, really good. And he's like right on, in these issues, and our minds are in sync. And I was reading it, right? And at some point, I remember saying, I think, Sean, you'll have to tell me if this is what happened. I think I called Sean and I said, Sean, you need a book. Is that what happened? That's how I remember it.
Exactly what
I
happened.
said, Sean, you need a book. Because he was writing these articles, and I thought, my gosh, this guy, he needs a book. So I called him up, and we had been talking on and off. I can't remember when we met, like 5, 6 years ago, and talking a lot. And so yeah, so that's how this happened. But what happened in my heart and my soul was, I think Sean has a perspective and an ability and a skill set that the world really needs. And he has it already on Substack, but that needs in a book. And so I really wanted to meld us together and see if he wanted to do that, to meld us together and to put together our separate essays and form them into a book. And, especially the commonality of them. And the other thing I wanted to do with Sean is that, like me, Sean is into solutions. Like he's a solutions thinker too. He understands the problem, and he knows there are a bunch of solutions to the boy crisis out there that exist, and that have been proven to work. And so I knew that. So I kind of said, well, come on, Sean, let's do a book. Let's get you a book. And also, let's focus not just on the problem, but the solutions. And Sean said, yeah, let's do it. That's my memory. Sean, is that
Yeah.
your memory?
That is 100% accurate, and I'm going to stick to that story. So that's exactly how it really came out. I think we've been following each other for years, and he thought it'd be a good idea for me to get a book out, and I'm really happy for Michael for doing that. And it was a wonderful process, and we were able to blend these different things into a narrative that I think uses data and uses solutions and uses an understanding of brain sex collectively. So you feel like you're coming out of the book with something. But I think Michael and I went into it with that in mind. So when he came to me, and we were discussing, as I remember, you are right, Mike, with everything you said. It was at my son's baseball game, and I kind of took off the phone to the side. He goes, you need a book. So let's, so I remember exactly where I was standing when he asked.
That's great. It's a great story. And I know that feeling, as a writer, and I also write a regular, as you know, I write a regular article every week that gets sent out to my list on mental life. So I have the same disability that Michael has, is that writing is the way I make sense of my own world, how I sort out my own issues, how I figure out kind of what works in my life and share then what I hope will be helpful with others. But writing a book is a whole different kind of process to, organize thoughts, to really decide what is worth putting into a fairly long-term process to get it written, to get it out. And I also will just mirror Michael. I had read many of the things you, Sean, had written, and I didn't quite have the idea of you need a book, but you do. I mean, getting a book with your name on it really uh, means something and allows a certain level of scholarship and reflection and data collection and being sure it's right. And, once you put it in a book, you want it to be accurate. And one of the things I really appreciate about your book is the depth, the accuracy, the readability of it, and the title. And I want to have you talk a little bit about the title, Boys. Hold it up again. I like to just, at least people are going to take their time reading when I hold it up, but I like to. I like to hold books, which is another thing you can't do with articles, right? I mean, everything's so digital, but this has got, you can touch it, you can hold it, you can refer to it. So, Boys a Rescue Plan. And I'd like you each to talk about what, because it isn't just a lot of information about what's wrong, what we could be doing, but it's actually a plan and leads to a plan of action. So, yeah, Michael, why don't you
Yeah.
kind of start with I don't know how you came up with the title. I know when I write books, often it takes time for the book to tell me what it wants to be called. They're like children. They don't necessarily come out with the stamp that says, here's what I think you are. It wants to tell us something. So what did the book say to you that you decided on that title?
Yeah, that's Jed. That's a beautiful way to put it. Yeah, after Saving Our Sons. So Saving Our Sons came out in 2017, and somewhere right after that, like within a year after that, um, I I had this title come to me, "Boys a Rescue Plan," uh, and I think it came because I was um, I was thinking about all the things related to solutions. I was thinking about two things. One was things related to solutions, um, and then also the subtitle of our book is "Moving Beyond the Politics of Masculinity to Healthy Male Development." And that was the other thing I was thinking about is, gosh, when I look around, most people are writing about masculinity. Is it good? Is it bad? And people may remember that the APA came out with guidelines right around there. That's right around when I got the title in my mind, Boys a Rescue Plan, for my quote unquote next book, which is going to be my last book in child development. And it just came to me from those two things. One was, why aren't people writing more about solutions, which exist, and why are we all spending so much time arguing about social constructs, like masculinity, when we got a lot of stuff we got to do in the world. We got to help these guys, and arguing about whether they're too masculine or not masculine or whatever. To me, it was too much. So the title Boys a Rescue Plan came to me back then. And then also the concept of how do we get beyond politics of masculinity to male development. And so I kind of brought that to Sean. I did bring the title in and said, what do you think? I have this title I've been thinking about. What do you think? And we went back and forth, and then we both also agreed on making sure that the reader knew that we were going to go beyond the politics of masculinity. We were not going to mire in that. We were going to go beyond them and go to male development. And I checked all of this with Sean, and Sean was like, yes, male development, that's what we want to do. Yes, we got to get beyond the politics of masculinity. And he liked the title. And so we tried other thoughts on titles, right, Sean? But we still ended up saying this is the right title.
Mhm.
What do you think?
Yeah, we had to do that. Having the politics in there was critical, and also the moving beyond. And so working through that, I think Michael may have written an essay at one point, something like "Boys a Rescue Plan." I don't know why I'm thinking that, but my mind is there. But I
Oh
remember
yeah,
the title.
for Gurian Institute. You're right. I used
I,
it in Gurian Institute blogs.
I
Yep.
remember just use that. And so I know
Right.
that thought was planted there with Michael for a long time. Like, why were we talking more about the solutions? And so it was great that idea didn't leave him, obviously. And he is a solutions guy, as am I. He does it with his programs. I've done it in the classroom, what have you, but you're always looking for the solution. So the politics part was critical and to put that in, but then say, okay, well, now that we know this, how do we get beyond it and find the real solutions? So yeah, I thought going back and forth, Michael's, the birth of Michael's child and Boys a Rescue Plan became, in addition, moving beyond the politics of masculinity to healthy male development. So we went back
Super.
and forth. It was great.
That's great. And so I want to kind of delve down a little more deeply into some of the specifics in the book. And as you know, kind of my background is varied. My early work, I was going to be a doctor. I was going to be a psychiatrist, and actually went off to medical school and got into one of the best medical schools in the country, and found that medicine of the time, this was in 1965, so quite a long time ago when I went off to medical school. And I left because even then medicine was very restrictive. And as you know, I've since gone back. I went after I was in my 60s. I went back and did studies the way I wanted to, and got a PhD in international health, and really looked at many broader issues, but particularly around males' mental health. And that comes from my own experience growing up and my father's issues. So I know one of the sections of your book talks about the male mental health crisis, and for me, that's a big part of what's going on with men. Everything from higher levels of suicide to deaths of despair to what's going on with boys that in many ways starts out. We don't start out as men, and but we often start out with mental health issues. So maybe you could talk about that area of the book and the male mental health crisis, and how you address that and some of the issues that you've addressed and are speaking to in the book.
Hey, Sean, do you want to start that with the statistics, and then I'll move to the clinical?
Yeah, sure, sure. So, what I did is I collected the data on what's happening in terms of mental health, and Michael will get into what I really like is when he discusses the overt and covert depression and how it presents more in males and females differently, where females are more overt and males are more covert, and that's really critical. And what you see that in is in the outcome, right? When you have 80% of your suicide deaths are male and over 70% of your overdose deaths are male, and you go to any state in the country, and that's what you're going to find. And you're also going to find it across the races. All boys of all races are suffering worse than their female counterparts in suicide and overdose death and alcohol death, all of that, right? You're seeing it also. So that I think is critical. So I did the data collection part and created these graphs for the book, which really allows people to anchor onto something as they go into the deeper end of the pool, which is the mind. And I think that's where we are able to collectively come together. And Michael can explain this better than I can, although I certainly understand it and I've used it in my classroom. So I think the data collection is key. And that's why I really push policymakers. You have to do this data. And it's critical that we do, because so many articles that we read will talk about, say, teen depression, and they'll work in statistics that will mention, females who are depressed. And it's really important that we do that. But what I find is that the statistics in some of these articles will really not say, hey, oh, by the way, 80% of those who are dying are male. And so we need to really address that, and we need to physically see it. When people see the numbers, it definitely moves them. Michael?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's something that's brilliant about this book and about Sean's work, and something I could not do is the graphs. The way that Sean does graphs and statistics is just great. So readers of the book are getting graphs, there's visuals and they see it all. And that's not a skill I have. And I'm just so glad that Sean brought that among many things. And then he and I are in agreement, and I know you are too, Jed, in terms of the clinical, that the way that our system is not really set up to understand the whole mental health crisis, right? I mean, we have kind of a broken health system. We're all trying to fix that. And it's not set up well to understand the male mental health crisis. There is more on it lately, as you said, Jed, like more people are thinking about it. There's more books coming out, there's more articles. But we just don't get it. We don't get how fragile. And so I have a chapter, we have a chapter in the book on the fragility of the male brain, how fragile this thing is. We're well armored physically, but the brain, it has a lot of fragilities. And the way we're raising kids, boys, and not raising them, the way we educate them and or don't educate them well, the way we try to do counseling with them, that just doesn't work, with 4 out of 5. I estimate from research 1 out of 5 of our male clients are would be like me. Like I can go to therapy and sit there and talk and love it. But 4 out of 5, the way we do counseling, 50 minutes, sit in a chair, it ain't gonna work. So this what we're trying to get at with the part one, which is on the male mental health crisis, is to point it out and then also to challenge the mental health system to train therapists, psychiatrists, everyone somewhat differently. In other words, train them in male type depression, train them in female type depression, what they look like, and then train everyone in how to work with males, and to not think that they're giving good mental health care by having someone come in and sit for 50 minutes and talk, because that is not good mental health care for most males. So yeah, so that's kind of the direction of that.
Oh, that's so important. I mean, uh, my experience is exactly parallels what you're describing, and I've for a long time I got, and most of the clients that I would work with that are male, some as you say, I'm more I can talk forever, and I like face to face, and I'm more a feminine type brain in some way, or bridge brain as you describe it, Michael. But most men are not like that, so most boys are not like that. So all of my work with males has taken that into account. So often my clinical sessions with males are going for walks or being able to do something physical while we're talking. So I want to get into the second area of that you talk about in the book, which again is really, really important. And I think you describe it brilliantly, at least how I wrote this down. I think this is right. The section where you say boys, sexual dimorphism, and the culture of the exception. It's a lot of words, but it speaks to some really, really critical issues that I don't think anywhere else in the literature or in studies have dealt with those issues as in depth, certainly as Michael and others researchers who have done some of the primary work with this. But Michael, maybe you could, describe a little and unpack some of those words of what those mean and how you address them in the book.
Right. Yes, there are these abstract words. Of course, from my writing's always very practical, but we got to get through the
Yeah.
abstract words. So sexual dimorphism, for those who don't know, is male female, which comes in on the X and the Y, right? So even if you're XXY, XYY, intersex, you still got X and Y. So if you got Y, then the brain is going to differentiate in utero.
Just let
Um,
me stop you for a minute. So the X and Y are chromosomes. So for
oh, sorry,
those, yeah,
chromosomes.
that
Thank you.
what those are as you're describing X and Y.
Sorry, yep, you're right. Yeah, so we all have that, right? So we're gonna have um uh we're gonna generally be XX female, XY male, generally some exceptions, etc. So the Y, the male chromosome, that one differentiates, it compels the brain to differentiate between female and male in utero. I'm telling you what you already know, of course, but just for our listeners. So the brain differentiates in utero, and it happens between 4, 5, 6 weeks in utero. That shot of androgenic hormone comes in from mom carrying the baby and says, "Oh, this is a Y," and then the testes start to drop. And so that the way the differentiation happens is that the male is flooded with testosterone, and that testosterone between like 4 or 5 weeks in utero to about 6, 7 months in utero, all that testosterone, all those hormones are flowing, and that's what differentiates the brain. So the child comes out, and the child is male or female. Now, or, of course, is very strict. We want to say male and female because we know there's a spectrum of what is male and what is female. There's no stereotype. There are 8 billion people on Earth, so that means there's around 4 billion ways to be female and around 4 billion ways to be male. All right? Okay, fair enough. But that said, the brain does differentiate. So even though there's a spectrum for 8 billion people, when we scan the brains, and as you guys know, I'm very brain scan based, right? I'm using brain scans that others have done, right, and published their studies, and I'm looking at those scans as they are and building my case about male and female based on brain scans because I only want to be science based. I'm not as sociology, right? I'm not as soft science. I'm more hard science. So that's really important to me. So what I've noticed, and this is that's what sexual dimorphism is. We are different, and we can see that on brain scans. The culture of the exception part is that I developed that term, I guess, invented that term about 7 or 8 years ago, because I noticed that the culture, as I know you guys have too, that the way that the big three does all this, the big three being academics, then government, then media, the way they kind of talk about these issues of sex is to conflate everything with gender, right? And try to get rid of sex, and get everything to be gender, which is soft, right? Which is social construct. And then to also say that look at these exceptions. These people are exceptions. So let's build a culture around these exceptions. And that shows up in when the culture says, let's just not even do male, female anymore. Let's just say that male, female is gone. And because look, we've got these gender nonconforming kids. Look, we have this trans person. So let's build the culture around the exceptions and not around the rule. So exceptions, scientifically, exceptions always prove a rule, right? The rule is proven by the existence of the exceptions, and then the exceptions are respected. Oh, these are exceptions, equal respect for these exceptions. And the rule is proven by the exception. So male, female is not going away. It has not gone away. It will not go away, right? Because of genetics. So we are male, we are female, and there are exceptions. And 30 years ago, in The Wonder of Boys, I developed the term bridge brain to try to help people understand the exceptions so that we wouldn't try to create a culture of the exception that would forget 95%, right, of people, so that we would be able to talk about everyone at once. And so that also is the section, part 2, where I talk about bridge brains and try to ask people to think about gender nonconforming and trans and so on as bridge brains with equal rights and all of that. It's not about that, but as bridge brains who are bridging the sexes rather than trying to erase the sexes, which I think is dangerous for a culture.
Yeah, that's so important. And as you know, I've been studying this as well for many years. And one of the researchers that that I have gotten to know and have quoted his work is David Page, is an MD at MIT. And he's one of his lab is one of the kind of foremost in the world that's looked particularly at the Y chromosome and chromosomal studies that have been done. And his conclusion, which I quote, and I think you've seen it as well, that there are 10 trillion cells in the human body, and every one is sex specific.
Right.
So and if we're male, every cell in our body has an X and Y chromosome, as you say, with few exceptions. And if you're a female, you have 2 X chromosomes, and that gets into things. But it isn't just the sexual apparatus that is sex specific. It's certainly the brain and many other parts of our functioning and has been that for, billions and billions of years of sexual differentiation among animals getting up to humans. So you brilliantly and others, and you've certainly highlighted the research that recognize that part of the sociological reasoning, I think, behind the fear of gender and sex differences is that it has been used in many situations to keep one sex separate, or to be told, well, you're a woman, you can't do this and that and the other. And, and it's done some for men. You can't do these things, you're not sensitive enough, or what have you. And I think what you and I and many others have been advocating, and I think there's starting to catch on, which is that the desire for understanding the equality and the exceptions doesn't erase the fact that there are sex differences that have implications in how we function, and we need to understand those. So that's, I think, I mean, we could be talking for weeks, and that's why we have a book and why you've written a number of books. So hopefully people will hear and take this little bit of information we're sharing. And then if you're interested, and if you're male, female, or you consider yourself anywhere in on the spectrum, these are information you want for yourself, your children, and grandchildren, and the state of health in the world. So we will go into more detail. I want to get to the third area that at least you addressed that I think are really important. You've touched on it, which you said the big three politics that keep us from helping boys. Um, and I think part of the reason I've been able to operate in the way that I have is I don't exist in either of those three. I touch all three of those realms, but I don't make my living only as one or the other, either in politics or in the world of academia and so on. So talk about those big three and kind of bring them to our attention, and how they at least can limit what we're able to understand in the world, and what you address in the book that helps counter those things.
Why don't you
Sean,
go?
you want
Well,
to
I was
start
going to
that
just
one?
say something. Just say something and bounce back to Michael.
Yeah.
The book is set up in a way, it's scaffolded really, almost like lesson plans with visual aids and things like that. So I really do think it appeals to both moms and dads and men and women. I'd love to see men and women reading it because I do think it appeals to everybody. And I think that with Michael's, deep science and then the scaffolded visuals, it becomes something presentable to all types of readers. And I think that's part of the setup of the book. Wouldn't you agree, Michael? And so that
Oh, absolutely. And you actually you said let's do it that way so that college classes can use it, high school classes can use it, PTA groups can use it, book groups can use it, and they can just read one chapter at a time. So yeah, it is absolutely that way, and that helps with the politics. You've got a lot. You have a lot in here on how these politics are keeping us. The politics of masculinity are keeping us from helping boys. Talk about that.
Yeah, and so a perfect example, when we look at the 2025 budget, and they were looking at helping our daughters. Of course, we want to help. I have nieces and I have a wife and I have mother and a sister and people I love. And I just look at the politics and how we can't even present. And I'll get into Michael's term, one of Michael's terms in a moment, of how we're just even afraid to discuss male issues. In the last budget, the words women and girls are mentioned 81 times in the 2025 budget, and the word boy or man does not even appear in the budget. Sometimes you see things like men and women in the military or men and women in the workplace, but literally how you can have a budget that mentions men, I mean, does not mention the word boy or the word man, but does mention the words women and girls. You start to say to yourself, okay, this is not a coincidence anymore. And policy after policy does it. And even on both sides of the aisle, what we tend to see is, although one might mention it more, at the end of the day, where's the beef, right? Where's the policy that's supporting it? And so politically, people are afraid to mention issues impacting boys and men for fear of offending what Michael calls the term feminophobia, the fear of offending the women's lobby. And it's not that people don't care about girls and women, of course we do, right? But there is a fear, I think, in the politics of our day to even address boys and men's issues for the fear of offending another group. And we all need to coexist and help each other. Michael, do you want to pick up from that?
Yeah, just the feminophobia, that I do believe that is part of what is going on politically, what Sean just described, where like we tell a story in the book that we heard from someone else, so it's kind of hearsay, so we use it metaphorically, but of a presidential campaign, for a woman, a presidential campaign where the people around her were saying, don't talk about boys and men. You're going to win fine by just getting women. If you talk about boys and men, you're going to get a backlash on that. Don't do that. Well, to me, that's feminophobia. That's we are paralyzed to help our boys and men, um, because our leaders are so afraid of what they perceive as the women's lobby or the feminist lobby, however they perceive that, and um, and yet they gotta know. Everyone's gotta know, just like every mom knows this, everyone knows that if you help boys and men, that is going to help girls and women. So it's not like you help boys and men and it's a competition, but that strain of feminism, um, as we all know, there are various strains of feminism. That one strain of feminism, academic feminism, we might call it, or gender feminism, whatever we call it, that strain of it is very powerful, and it pits males and females against each other. And we talk about the oppressor oppressed paradigm, and all it uses is that, right? All the guys are oppressors, all the women are victims. That strain has a huge sway on the big three, on academe, government, because what academe does, government and media do, right? So it has a lot of power. And then politicians and leaders in the big three, academics, government, and media, then become afraid of, as Sean said, offending, and being canceled by, right, by what they perceive as that lobby. So I call that feminophobia.
Yeah. And of course, these issues and our podcasts and people that will be watching this are mostly in the United States, and so a lot of the politics that we were talking about have to do with the American political parties. But these issues are international. They're issues that are in many other countries at one degree or another. And as you guys know, one of the people I've interviewed both for a new book that they've put out and the podcast that I put out supporting good and interesting people in the men's health field are Richard Reeves, who was from the UK originally and had a very different sensibility about males and females. And then he's since been in the United States and started the American Institute for Boys and Men that addresses these issues in similar, I think, to what we're talking about, recognizing that there are differences and you can, talk about men's issues and talk about the actual data that supports the reality that in many ways boys and men are not doing well without discounting the ways in which women and girls are not doing well. And you can talk about both. And as you guys recognize, and we recognize, is by really talking about accurately and with accurate data, both without, distorting the data for political reasons and discounting the realities of male-female differences. What we want to do and what you and we advocate is rather than trying to pretend that there are not brain differences, let's deal with the realities of ways in which different groups have been discriminated against or have been neglected so that we can, be aware and pay attention and offer good services for everyone. So I want to get just with the little time we have today, we could and maybe we will have a chance to do more of these in-depth interviews because your book deserves a lot more time than we're going to have time today. But I'd like to have you talk a bit about where things are now with your your work that you're doing individually and collectively around the book, where things are now, and what you project, what's in the works, what do you see happening as we get farther into 2025 and the world that we're living in 2025, both in this country, in the United States, and in the world with all the issues that are going on in the world. So talk about where things are now with your work and where you see things going in the future. Maybe have you each talk a bit about your both individual work with your organizations and the collective work that you're doing as you collectively talk about the book and get it out in the world more. Michael, why don't you start on this one?
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. And it sort of fits with section 4. I mean, sort of organically fits with the fourth section of the book, which is solutions, where
Right.
we've got 7 chapters on solutions that work to help boys. And so that's really a lot of what I'm doing with the Gurian Institute, and kind of couple primary, we have sort of 3 primary foci. One is training parents, helping parents. Other is training educators. The other is training mental health, counselors and people in the mental health field, to show. And so wherever I go, whatever I do it on Zoom live. I'm showing brain scans, right? I'm getting people to see it, their mouths drop open, right? They go, oh my gosh, did not sense that, but did not know that the brain is set up this differently. And wow, that explains things. And then then here are the solutions. And the Gurian Institute, we've existed about 30 years. So we have 100 trainers and doing all this and gathering data. And so we've proven that if you go into schools that call us almost always because they've disaggregated and the boys are behind, right? That the test scores for the girls go up, after the programs and the solutions. The grades for the girls go up, boys and girls both, trans, everyone are uplifted by this working. Oh, oops, hold on, I'll unplug my, it didn't unplug the business phone, sorry. Could you hear that? Did you hear the phone ring through
I
the?
didn't hear it,
No.
so it didn't
Oh
come
wow,
through here.
okay. I must look crazy.
Clairvoyant.
The business phone rang and I
Yeah.
unplugged it. So the solutions are kind of a big deal to me. And I'll just end my part by saying, I think one of the reasons I wanted Sean and that we wanted to do this book together, and that specifically I reached out to Sean, was this concept that we see in people's work, where they publish a book on boys and they go, well, we don't really know what works. Or the media articles, do this all the time. The reporter writes an article and says, well, there's this problem and we don't really know what works. But we do, right? We've had 30 years of knowing what works. You have pioneered, Jed, in male mental health, right? I mean, you know what works. And
Yeah.
I pioneered in education. We know what works, and in parenting. So I'm very much in that. I'm very much in the mode of let's proliferate these solutions, and then I'll then go to Sean.
Well, no, and I want to pick up what Michael's saying here. Like there was a recent article in the Wall Street Journal about girl scores dipping in math after COVID, like they had taken a bigger leap, but they are actually about the same or slightly ahead of boys. You can kind of, but the real issue was that both are on the decline and have been on the decline for some time. And so, well, there's this problem. Well, there is a solution, and it's in the pedagogical approaches that are used to help boys and girls learn differently so that they can exercise their best self in math or reading. But the one consistent thing that wasn't mentioned in the article is the gap that's continued between boys and girls. And so that's what when we talk about a little bit of how information is presented in a way that's kind of slanted, right? Because I do worry about the fact that now is there a little bit of attention being paid to boys? People worried we're going to forget about girls, which will never happen. By the way, I just don't think that will ever happen. And really, so what I'm doing right now is trying to get this work into the universities, into the high schools, into school boards, into policymakers' hands, which is beginning to happen. Thanks with Michael's help and then my push, and we need to get this into the hands of people to say, hey, wait, we need to start thinking about the pedagogy and how we're approaching it because the solutions are there. The Boys and Girls Learn Differently model does work. I've used it in schools. Michael's used it for decades, and so I think that we have to really start thinking that way to help them. And I know we it's funny, the author of the article, the Wall Street Journal, and I spoke earlier this week, and he's going to write an article about teachers and how we need more male teachers. And that's really great However, I know a lot of women teachers who are phenomenal with boys. I mean, they're just tremendous. They get them. And so it really is that pedagogical approach. It'd be nice to see more men in education as a career path, but they also have to have the ability to exercise the approaches in the classroom that allow our boys and our girls to thrive. And that's really what Michael's talking about. And we do have solutions and we've seen it work. And that's what I think is critical. So what I'm doing on my end is really pushing us to the universities, pushing it to policymakers. I will be having meetings with policymakers, in late February or early March as administrations come in and new people are in charge and that kind of thing. But really even school boards and parents and PTAs, church groups, really reading this, there's questions in there that have really allowed you to think more deeply. How is my institution working to help my boys thrive and help my girls thrive? What physical programs are we having? And Michael knows I've worked with group programs where we have boys programs and we have girls programs. And if I see, hey, wait a minute, why aren't there as many girls doing this, or why aren't there as many boys doing this? We start to look at the reasons why and find those solutions because they're there. They're there for sure.
Well, I want to just kind of pull this discussion towards an ending for today, but to ask you each or both of you if you have a joint uh, answer to this question. So what I know about the book, and I'm going to hold it up again just because I like to hold books up and let people at least. There is a book, and it really is super packed with not only good information about the problem and the various areas we've talked, but very specific solutions. And God willing, spirit willing, wherever that these solutions will take hold. Many things are taking hold and will more. But if you think about this year, 2025, and you think about what are three important solutions that you would like, there's a lot in there, there's many more than three, but I'm going to ask you to reflect on three, that if these three things that you think are most important and you really feel in your heart and in your mind that could have some actual solutions in the time frame of this coming year, because there's a lot that will probably take years and years and years to ever in fact get solved. But what ones are you most excited about that you feel that you'd like to see, that you're going to spend this year as you're out doing various things to do everything you can to get these three solutions implemented? So Michael, I'm going to start with you again, and then Sean, if you kind of say, yeah, I agree, I'm going to be working on that, or if you have some others you could add to. But Michael, what three are you most excited about that you're going to really, be excited and push in 2025?
Yeah, great question. One is I'm going to be pushing the culture and people individually to understand the whole constellation of sex gender. So in this book, what I do in the book is say, I would like us to stop talking about sex and gender, but to put the two together. And from now on, just talk about sex gender. Okay, so what I think is a solution to the issues, a lot of the issues we're having is everyone talk about sex gender now, which means it will have to include sex and it will include gender. So it will have to start with male female, right? Because that's sex. And then it can include gender nonconforming, trans, LGBTQ, IA plus. Everyone can be included. And that's a solution I'm going to be really pushing for so that we can get out of this polarization about, well, if you talk about sex, you're anti-trans, all of this stuff. Got to get out of that.
Super.
And it'll also help us to understand better how to care for children and what is gender affirming care. Is it appropriate for a 10-year-old? No, probably not. Is it appropriate for an 18-year-old? Yeah. Well, if we talk about sex gender instead of just gender, I think we can save lives. Okay, so that would be one solution I'm really
Super.
pushing for. A second one is to get what the boys and girls learn differently into all the schools, because the teachers love it and it helps the kids so much. I'm always pushing for that. That's Gurian Institute. And then the third is to to try to get it, and I'm going to send this to Sean, to try to get it more into academe, to get more college classes, especially in schools of education, to see the brain scans so that those teachers will go into schools and know how to teach boys and girls and the whole spectrum. Sean?
Yeah, I mean, I think getting it into the schools is key. I mean, number one is getting it into the schools. I think getting into the hands of coaches. I think getting it into the hands of when I say schools, I'm talking K through 12 and all through college as well, because teachers need to be learning, psychologists need to be learning, sociologists need to be learning, coaches need to be learning. But the one thing I would really like to see, my number one is a congressional hearing on the status of boys and men. We have not done anything in this country as paramount as that. We've had a number of hearings on impacts of women. We've opened Office of Women's Health, a White House Gender Policy Council, which excludes males. So I don't know how it's a gender policy council, but that I hope you appreciate my little bit of sarcasm there. But I like to use it when I can, and so I really think that's my number one is actually a congressional hearing on the status of boys and men. I know how incredibly hard that is, but I know there are people who are now listening, and I think that looking at the numbers, people are fed up. But other than that, the other things Michael were talking about need to be in the home, in the school, in the community groups, and in academia at the higher levels.
That's super. Well, before we wrap up for today, I'd like for you each to say where people can reach you, your organization, your email address. I'll be putting this into other things, but for those that are watching the video and they say, God, this is really interesting. Where can I learn more? Michael, where can people reach you? What's the
Easiest way is info@gurianinstitute.com. So
super,
info, info@gurianinstitute.com. And my last name is spelled Gurian.
super. And Sean, how about you?
And you can reach me at Sean K, that's SEANK at gibm.us. And you can always follow me at inhiswords.us.
Super. Okay, my friends. Well, we're going to stop for today, and this has been a too short but very, very interesting. And I hope that we will be able to get it out in many forms so that other people can take advantage of it. So for now, Michael, Sean, thank you for taking time to be with us, and look forward to continuing our ongoing work in this very fascinating and interesting world of sex gender. So we'll leave it at that for today.
Way to
Thank you,
end it
Jed.
there.
It's an
Thank you,
honor.
Jed.
Thank you.
Cheers.